Story 1: The Tenant in the Walls. My first foray into property management was a small, charming duplex in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It seemed like the perfect investment, a steady income stream with minimal fuss. The previous owner had been meticulous, and the place was in pristine condition. I quickly found a tenant for the upper unit, a quiet, unassuming woman named Sarah, who worked as a librarian. The lower unit remained vacant for a few weeks, and I spent my evenings there, doing minor touch-ups and enjoying the unexpected solitude. It started subtly, faint scratching sounds like mice coming from within the walls. I set traps, but they remained untouched. Then, the sounds grew louder, more deliberate. It sounded less like rodents, and more like something dragging itself through the insulation. A slow rhythmic scraping that would begin around midnight and continue until the early hours of the morning. I dismissed it as old house noises, the settling of timbers, the creaking of pipes, but the sounds were too consistent, too unsettling. One night, the scratching was accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible humming. It was a low, mournful tune, barely audible, but undeniably human. My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the wall, my heart pounding against my ribs. The humming stopped. I waited, my breath held, and then it started again, closer this time, directly behind the wall, where I stood. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wasn't mice. It was something else, something living, trapped within the very structure of the house. I called an exterminator, then a plumber, then an electrician. Each one found nothing. The sounds persisted, growing bolder, more intrusive. The scratching became a frantic scrabbling, the humming a guttural moan. I started to feel a profound sense of unease, a chilling awareness that I was not alone in the duplex. I'd walk through the empty lower unit, my ears straining, convinced that unseen eyes were watching my every move from within the walls. Sarah, my tenant upstairs, began to complain. She heard the noises too, the scratching, the humming, the unsettling sounds of something moving within the walls. She was a quiet woman, not prone to dramatics, and her growing fear was palpable. I tried to reassure her, to offer explanations, but my own conviction was wavering. The sounds were now constant, a relentless, insidious torment that permeated every corner of the duplex. One particularly dark and stormy night, the sounds intensified. The scratching became a desperate tearing, the humming a guttural scream. It sounded like something was trying to break free, to claw its way out of the walls. I huddled in the living room, clutching a baseball bat, my eyes fixed on the walls, convinced they would burst open at any moment. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and the scent of damp earth and something else, something putrid and sweet, was now overwhelming. Then, the wall in front of me began to bulge. Slowly, inexorably, a section of plaster pushed outwards, a faint crack appearing in its surface. My breath caught in my throat. The crack widened, a spiderweb of fissures spreading across the wall. And then, a single, pale, skeletal finger pushed through the plaster, followed by another, and another. They were long, impossibly thin, and tipped with broken, yellowed nails. They clawed at the plaster, tearing away chunks, revealing a glimpse of the darkness within. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that seemed to break the spell. I dropped the bat and ran, scrambling out of the duplex, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove away, leaving the lights on, the door ajar, the sounds of tearing and screaming echoing in my ears. I never returned to that duplex. I sold it at a significant loss, never revealing the true reason for my hasty departure. The memory of the tenant in the walls, its skeletal fingers clawing at the plaster, its guttural screams, still haunts me. I learned that day that some investments are not worth the price, and some properties hold secrets far older and darker than any human can comprehend. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still hear the faint scratching, the distant humming, a chilling reminder that the tenant in the walls is still there, forever trapped, forever trying to break free. The terror of that night lingered long after I had fled the duplex. Every creak of my own home, every rustle of leaves outside, sent shivers down my spine. I found myself constantly checking the walls, half expecting to see a faint bulge, a spiderweb of cracks, a skeletal finger, pushing through. The image of those long yellowed nails clawing at the plaster was burned into my mind, a grotesque tableau that replayed itself endlessly in my nightmares. I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion, but the fear was too real, too visceral. I started researching the history of the duplex, digging through old property records, local archives, anything that might shed light on its dark past. I found obscure references to a previous owner, a reclusive man who had lived in the lower unit decades ago. He was known for his eccentricities, his strange habits, and his sudden, unexplained disappearance. The neighbors had simply assumed he had moved away, but no one had ever seen him leave. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what I had encountered was not a figment of my imagination, but something ancient, something malevolent, something that had been trapped within those walls for decades. My sleep became a battleground. The scratching and humming would invade my dreams, a cacophony of desperate sounds, all coming from within the walls, all pleading for release. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced it was in the room with me. I tried, sleeping with the lights on, with music playing, with a crucifix under my pillow. Nothing worked. The terror became a constant companion, a silent dread that followed me into my waking hours. I started to fear going to sleep, knowing that the moment I drifted off, I might be plunged back into that waking nightmare. Sarah, my former tenant, called me a few weeks later. Her voice was a strained whisper, filled with a terror that mirrored my own. She had moved into a new apartment, but the sounds had followed her. The faint scratching, the guttural humming, the unsettling feeling of being watched. It was all there, in her new home. She was convinced that whatever was in the duplex had latched onto her, that it was now haunting her. I tried to offer words of comfort, but my own fear was too overwhelming. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the tenant in the walls was not just confined to the duplex, but was a parasitic entity, a malevolent spirit that could attach itself to those who dared to disturb its slumber. Story 2. The Haunting of Apartment 4B. Moving into Apartment 4B seemed like a dream come true. It was a spacious, pre-war unit in a historic building, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a rent that was surprisingly affordable for the city. The previous tenant had moved out abruptly, leaving behind most of their furniture, which the landlord offered to let me keep. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter in my life. It started subtly. Objects would move. A book I'd left on the nightstand would be on the floor in the morning. A coffee mug I'd placed on the counter would be in the sink. I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness, or perhaps the building settling. But then, the sounds began, faint whispers, like a conversation happening just beyond my hearing, coming from the empty bedroom. I'd check, but the room would be silent, the air still. Then, the cold spots. Patches of air, intensely cold, that would appear randomly in the apartment, lingering for a few moments before dissipating. They were unsettling, but I tried to rationalize them as drafts, or faulty insulation. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, a constant, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. One night, I woke up to the distinct sound of footsteps pacing in the empty bedroom. They were heavy, deliberate, and accompanied by a faint, mournful sigh. My heart pounded against my ribs. I grabbed my phone, its flashlight beam trembling in my shaking hand, and slowly approached the bedroom door. I pushed it open, my breath held, and the room was empty. The air was thick with an unseen presence, and the scent of old dust and something else, something faintly floral and sweet, was now overwhelming. I started researching the building's history. I found old newspaper articles, police reports, and even a few online forums dedicated to local hauntings. Apartment 4B, it turned out, had a dark past. Decades ago, a young woman named Eleanor Vance had lived there. She had been a talented artist, but had suffered from a debilitating illness that left her bedridden. She had died alone in the apartment, her body not discovered for days. The articles spoke of her profound loneliness, her unfulfilled dreams, and the lingering sadness that had permeated her life. The manifestations grew bolder. Doors would slam shut, windows would open on their own, and the whispers became clearer, forming fragmented sentences, desperate pleas for help. Alone, forgotten, can't leave. I started to see her, a faint, almost translucent silhouette, standing in the empty bedroom, bathed in the moonlight. It was Eleanor, her long hair flowing around her, her arms outstretched, as if reaching for something, or someone. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel her presence. A profound sense of ancient sorrow radiating from her. I tried to help her. I spoke to her, offering words of comfort, telling her she wasn't alone, that she wasn't forgotten. I played her classical music, hoping to soothe her restless spirit. I even tried to find her living relatives, hoping to connect her with her past. But nothing seemed to work. Her presence remained, a constant, sorrowful reminder of a life cut short. A soul trapped in a cycle of loneliness and despair. One night, I woke up to a piercing scream. It was Eleanor's voice, filled with an unimaginable terror. I rushed into the bedroom and saw her, her translucent form writhing, as if in pain. The air was thick with a chilling cold, and the scent of decay was now overwhelming. I could feel unseen hands pulling at my clothes, cold breaths on my skin. The fear was so intense that I thought my heart would simply give out. I huddled in a corner, my eyes fixed on Eleanor, convinced she was being tormented by something else, something darker. When the sun finally rose, casting its golden light over the apartment, the screams faded, replaced by the familiar silence. Eleanor's form was gone. I packed my bags, left a note for the landlord, and moved out of apartment 4B without looking back. I never returned to that building, or to any place where the past clung so heavily to the present. The memory of Eleanor, her sorrowful screams, her desperate pleas, still haunts me. I learned that day that some homes are not just buildings, but prisons for lost souls. And some histories are not just stories, but lingering echoes of profound tragedy. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still hear the faint whispers, the distant cries, the echoes of apartment 4B, a chilling reminder that some stories, once heard, can never truly be forgotten. The memory of Eleanor, her sorrowful screams, her desperate pleas, clung to me like a shroud. Even after I had fled apartment 4B, the feeling of being watched, the sudden cold spots, the faint scent of decay would appear randomly in my new, seemingly safe apartment. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, convinced that Eleanor, or whatever tormented her, had followed me, that it was still out there, lurking in the periphery of my vision. My new neighbors noticed my change in behavior, the dark circles under my eyes, my sudden aversion to silence. They attributed it to the stress of moving. Never truly understanding the profound horror that had gripped me, sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. When I did manage to drift off, the nightmares were relentless. I would be back in apartment 4B, the oppressive cold suffocating me, Eleanor's screams echoing in my ears. Her translucent form would writhe in pain, and I would feel unseen hands pulling at my clothes, cold breaths on my skin. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the phantom sensation of her sorrowful presence. I tried sleeping with the lights on, with music playing, with a blanket over my head. Nothing worked. The terror became a constant companion, a silent dread that followed me into my waking hours. I started to fear going to sleep, knowing that, the moment I drifted off, I might be plunged back into that waking nightmare. One night, during an especially vivid episode, as Eleanor's screams filled my room, and her translucent form writhed before me, I felt a surge of anger, a desperate defiance. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, but I could think. And in my mind, I screamed at whatever tormented her. I cursed it, I willed it to leave her alone. And for the first time, I felt a slight tremor in the oppressive presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was a crack in its armor, a sign that my will, however small, had an effect. From that night on, I started fighting back, not physically, but mentally. I would focus on a single thought, a single memory, anything to distract myself from the overwhelming dread. I would scream in my mind, a silent, furious roar. And slowly, gradually, the episodes became less frequent, less intense. Eleanor's presence still appears sometimes, a fleeting glimpse in the corner of my eye, a faint pressure on my chest. But now, I know how to fight back. I know it's not just a dream, and I know that even when your body is paralyzed, your mind can still be a weapon against the darkness. Story 3. The House with the Hidden Room. My partner, Mark, and I had finally saved enough for a down payment on our first house. It was an old Victorian, a little run down, but with good bones and a sprawling garden. We saw it as a project, a labor of love that would eventually become our dream home. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who had lived there for decades, and the house was filled with their memories, their antique furniture, and a pervasive, comforting scent of lavender and old books. It started subtly, a faint draft, even when all the windows were closed. A persistent chill in one particular corner of the living room, no matter how high we turned up the heat. We dismissed it as quirks of an old house, charming eccentricities that added to its character. But then, the sounds began. Faint scratching, like something trying to get out, coming from behind the built-in bookshelves in the study. We tapped on the wall, but it sounded solid. We assumed it was mice, or perhaps the house settling. Then, the dreams started. Vivid, unsettling dreams of being trapped in a small, dark space, of scratching at walls that wouldn't yield, of a suffocating sense of panic. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a faint whisper carried on the wind. Mark had similar dreams, though he was reluctant to talk about them, dismissing them as stress from the renovation. One evening, while Mark was at work, I was in the study, trying to organize some of the previous owner's old books. I noticed a small, almost invisible seam in the wallpaper behind one of the bookshelves. My curiosity, overriding my initial unease, began to grow. I pushed against it, and to my surprise, a small section of the wall swung inwards, revealing a narrow, dark passage. It was a hidden room, a secret space that wasn't on any of the blueprints. I grabbed my flashlight, my heart pounding, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and a strange, musty odor, like old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. The room was small, barely large enough to stand in, and completely empty, save for a single, rusted metal box in the corner. As I reached for it, I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling awareness that I was not alone in the hidden room. I could feel unseen eyes watching my every move. I opened the box, my hands shaking. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and dried flowers, was a small, leather-bound diary. It belonged to a young woman named Clara, the daughter of the original owners, who had vanished from the house decades ago. The diary entries spoke of a controlling father, a forbidden love, and a desperate plan to escape. The last entry was chilling. He knows he's locked me in. I can hear him outside. He's humming. My blood ran cold. The faint humming I'd heard in my dreams, the scratching in the walls. It wasn't mice. It was Clara, trapped, desperate, and slowly dying in this hidden room. The dreams weren't just dreams. They were echoes of her final moments. I could feel her presence now, a profound sense of ancient sorrow radiating from the very walls of the room. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and the scent of decay was now overwhelming. I stumbled out of the hidden room, slamming the secret door shut, my mind reeling. I told Mark everything, showing him the diary, the hidden room. He was skeptical at first, but the evidence was undeniable. We called the police, who, after some initial hesitation, launched an investigation. They found Clara's remains in the hidden room, a tragic testament to a life cut short, a soul trapped in a cycle of loneliness and despair. We sold the house shortly after, unable to live in a place that held such a dark secret. The memory of Clara, her desperate pleas, her final moments, still haunts me. I learned that day that some homes are not just buildings, but prisons for lost souls. And some secrets are not just hidden, but buried deep within the very fabric of a place. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still hear the faint scratching, the distant humming, a chilling reminder that the house with the hidden room is still out there. Its secrets waiting to be discovered, its echoes forever lingering. The memory of Clara, her desperate pleas, her final moments, clung to me like a shroud. Even after we had sold the house, the feeling of being watched, the faint scent of lavender and old books, the chilling cold spots, would appear randomly in our new, seemingly safe home. I found myself constantly checking the walls, half expecting to see a faint bulge, a spiderweb of cracks, a skeletal finger pushing through. The image of that hidden room, a tomb within our own home, was burned into my mind, a grotesque tableau that replayed itself endlessly in my nightmares. I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by stress and trauma. But the fear was too real, too visceral. I started researching the history of the house, digging through old property records, local archives, anything that might shed light on its dark past. I found obscure references to the original owners, a seemingly respectable family with a dark secret. The father, a stern and controlling man, had been known for his possessive nature, especially towards his daughter Clara. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what we had encountered was not a figment of our imagination, but something ancient, something malevolent, something that had been trapped within those walls for decades. My sleep became a battleground. The dreams were relentless. I would be back in the hidden room, the oppressive darkness suffocating me, Clara's desperate, scratching echoing in my ears. The humming, a chilling lullaby, would fill the air, and I would feel unseen hands pulling at my clothes, cold breaths on my skin. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the phantom sensation of her sorrowful presence. I tried sleeping with the lights on, with music playing, with a blanket over my head. Nothing worked. The terror became a constant companion, a silent dread that followed me into my waking hours. I started to fear going to sleep, knowing that the moment I drifted off, I might be plunged back into that waking nightmare. One night, during an especially vivid episode, as Clara's desperate scratching filled my room, and the chilling humming resonated in my ears, I felt a surge of anger, a desperate defiance. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, but I could think. And in my mind, I screamed at whatever tormented her. I cursed it. I willed it to leave her alone. And for the first time, I felt a slight tremor in the oppressive presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was a crack in its armor, a sign that my will, however small, had an effect. From that night on, I started fighting back, not physically, but mentally. I would focus on a single thought, a single memory, anything to distract myself from the overwhelming dread. I would scream in my mind, a silent, furious roar, and slowly, gradually, the episodes became less frequent, less intense. Clara's presence still appears, sometimes, A fleeting glimpse in the corner of my eye, a faint pressure on my chest. But now, I know how to fight back. I know it's not just a dream, and I know that even when your body is paralyzed, your mind can still be a weapon against the darkness.